What if I manually map the PLUs for these restaurants? I'll do it manually. And then each time there's order come in, we have someone behind the scene punch the order in the point of sale. And the restaurant will think it's fully automated because they didn't need to deal with it. And that worked. And the guy was like, if you can do this, I'll pay you. And that's when I realized, look, if the guy has 100 restaurant will pay me $20 for doing that, what if I build a full platform? Very quickly, I think in the first couple months, I added 300-400 restaurants.
You say the first couple months, you added a couple hundred?
Yeah, it was very cheap. I was like, if you're ready to pay me $10 a month, I'll make sure this problem goes away.
Today's guest is one of the most fascinating builders in the entire restaurant technology ecosystem. Someone who grew up inside the industry, transformed it once by starting Lightspeed POS, and now is transforming it again through Deliverect, where he is CEO and co-founder. For those of you who might not be familiar with Deliverect, they are a company that started just 7 years ago and have grown to over 70,000 restaurants worldwide. They process more than 1 billion digital orders, and they've reached a valuation north of $1 billion. It's the kind of rocket ship outcome that most founders only dream of. Whether you're building a company, running a restaurant operation, or just fascinated where AI and ordering is headed, this is one of the most insightful conversations we've had on the show. With that, I'd like to introduce you to Zhong.
Every day, restaurant operators face the same impossible question. How much should we prep today? Day after day, it's the same cycle. Guessing, scrambling, and hoping you got it right. ClearCOGS changes everything. Our AI analyzes your sales data, weather, events, and trends to tell you exactly what to prep, order, and staff before you need it. 53% reduction in bread waste. The projections are right on the money. We added 2% to our bottom line literally overnight. It's empowered us to scale confidently. Every morning, you get a daily prep sheet. That's it. No guesswork, no waste, just confident, data-driven decisions that transform your entire operation. Stop reacting to yesterday. Start commanding tomorrow. ClearCOGS, making every day go right before it even starts. Learn more at clearcogs.com.
Zhong, thanks for coming on. You guys are, 7 years old at this point?
Yeah.
You raised at a $1.4 billion valuation. You created a $1 billion company in 7 years. I mean, first off, for all of us that are out there trying to build companies, that's insane. What was that like?
That was a bit crazy. I think, today, Deliverect powers over 70,000 restaurants around the world, right? So, thinking about that, look, it's we just celebrated this summer even that we processed for these 70,000 restaurants over 1 billion orders processed. 1 billion orders is quite a lot, but then if you know that just in 25, we'll do, 500 million of that. So we're still very in the exponential growth.
But just from a human perspective, I mean, you couldn't have thought that, 7 years ago you'd be here. We dream about these things, but what was that roller coaster? What's it been like?
It's a crazy roller coaster. That being said, I think people think overnight success. In fairness, overnight success in my case took 20 years because it's not my first company. Actually, my third company, and the last company that we built. We in 2010 I created one of the first iPad point of sales. So really on iPad 1, Steve Jobs was there, his iPad 1, and then we're like, okay, maybe we can build a restaurant point of sale. On top of that, imagine people can just grab a tablet and run their restaurant. How cool would that be? And that company is today a public company. It's called Lightspeed, so more for the SMB restaurants around the world. And so, look, although I would say it's overnight, we have a lot of lessons learned, and one of the things motivation of starting Deliverect, besides restaurant really saying, I'll explain later, to help them to take the challenge of delivery and digital, was back then is like, hey, everyone's always saying that we are lucky. That's a running gag between me and my co-founders. They are like, you're lucky because, you guys made an app and then, it was on iPad. So obviously you are lucky, you didn't choose it. It happens. Now probably we're lucky because look, I'm Chinese, right? Or Asian, heritage. So I must have seen COVID happening or coming. So that's why, we created this company 2-3 years ahead, perfect timing. So, and that's a running gag, but in reality, we try to follow the markets, listen to our customers, and then once in a while you get it right.
All right. I noticed that you casually skipped over that second company and went from publicly traded to billion-dollar company. What was the middle one there?
So the first company, so how I grew up in this space is, look, I'm now 40, but I spent more than 2 decades in the restaurant industry. My first gig was because of my dad. And you guys gonna think, oh, your parents have an Asian restaurant. Sadly enough, you can't order kung pao chicken with me. But my father did have a point of sale company for Asian restaurants, like
Oh, okay.
in
So you
the
were born and bred into this
in the
point of sale
90s.
world.
Yeah, think about like DOS kind of stuff. Like
Yeah.
think about keyboard. And so I grew up in that space because, look, as Asian dad, he was like, I was 15. I was like, man, you need to work. You can't like stay home like this. Then I turned 16. He's like, man, you really, really need to work. So I went to study back then Dreamweaver. For people that don't know, it's like a tool to make websites. So I follow evening school. I learned to code, creating websites. And between my 16 and 18, I still have that company. I created a web agency that mainly made, I would say now, very ugly websites for Asian restaurants, and I made over 1,000 restaurant websites. So that's how I got rolled in that business.
By the way, that'd be a great LinkedIn like title. I make ugly websites for Asian restaurants.
And they still exist. So once in a while, people are like, is this one? If it's like kitsch and ugly and there's a lot of flashing colors, yeah, there's a big chance I made it.
There's something about programming something that lasts a long time, though. That there's some pride in that. I know that like when we built our MVP, Osa and I hacked together some reports, and like to this day, they still work. And it's like, I don't think we could change anything because like the whole thing would break, but like the pride we have that they still run is, I'm sure you feel the same way about the website.
No, exactly. That being said, I learned that restaurant were a tough crowd, right? So I actually vowed, like when I went to study software engineering, like anything beside making software for restaurants, because it's a tough environment, it's high intensity, and if you make software for them and something goes wrong, if the world is ending and you're like in charge of it. So I thought never again.
We always say, since we do the predictive stuff, when we give a bad number, it's a really bad day for a lot of people. Same deal on the POS. When your POS goes down, it's a really bad day for a lot of people.
So to give you an idea, why did I start the first iPod point of sale? So it's actually due to something like that. So my father was once in a while on holiday. He never go on holiday, but if he's on holiday, he throws me the phone. I was like 22 or 23. He was like, look, you're doing support. I'm off for like 4 or 5 days. And so, once in a while you had someone yelling at you. I had a Chinese lady, calling me, yelling at me in like, non-stop saying I need to come because she can't enter, her orders on the phone. And so she didn't want to talk to me and explain it. So I drove to the restaurant, and the restaurant was, I think, 3.5 hours away. So I took the car, drove 3.5 hours. And you know what happened? The cleaning lady has accidentally touched numlock on the keypad. And she could not enter the numbers on the keypad. And so it's an Asian restaurant, so everything on phone. So literally, I pressed numlock, drove another 3.5 hours back. And so in those 7 hours, I contemplated my life, but also thought like, man, there must be a better way for, restaurant software to be managed and solved, or even troubleshooted than like this physical offline, terminals, right? Because back then you didn't have the cloud.
When you see the number lock key to this day, does that story flash back?
It flashed back because I was a very long drive, and like I was like, if you could just explain to me on the phone what the problem is, but she kept yelling at me. It's like, and your father told me you would come and support me, so you need to come. And that always lingered. So when I would say Steve Jobs came out with the iPhone and then the iPad, I was like, man, what if we do this on this tablet thing and it's online? It's and we can check stuff, and I can update the software. Maybe I don't need to do this. This is game changing. And that was, why we started the first iPad point of sale.
Well, you make that sound easy because back in the day, internet was not that fast. Processing speeds weren't that great. There were a lot of flaws. Was it that easy to get off the ground? I mean, what was it like imagining the first cloud-based tablet POS?
That was very hard. I think we were, after my studies, I was working at a mobile agency where we were creating app for website and smartphones. But back then, smartphones were Nokia N95s and BlackBerry devices. So like that was a smartphone. So I feel very old, right? So we could, when iPad came out, it was a game changer, and we thought, wow, it's opened so much functionality. But because we knew how to handle these very slow devices, actually we created a very efficient and quick point of sale that still works. I think that's where people were amazed that this can work on an iPad, right? So and that scaled quite quickly, because back then, even I was trying to scale the company, convincing investors, they're like, no way you can scale this. But I was like, every day I have tens of thousands of people wanting this software. And they
You're
literally
like,
told me this is
guys, what do you
impossible.
mean we can't scale it? That's what the internet's for. Like
But
this is the most scalable version of it.
people didn't understand it because investors didn't understand, how can you have 10,000 people downloading and using your point of sale for restaurants? I'm like, yeah, but there's something called the App Store. In hindsight, if we made any game on it and charged $5, we would have been, way quicker, richer than doing the hard work. But, that's how you scaled.
But you got to make your dad proud somewhere in the line there, helping out with restaurant POS.
Oh, I think my dad is still tough. Even you mentioned we raised at high valuation. I came home, I told my dad, look in the papers, and he looked at me and he's like, so what? You're not profitable yet. So that was
That sounds like a
that's
father.
the tone that I get.
You're like the profitable ones publicly traded, Dad. I had to move on to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. So not easy. Yeah.
So you said you had 3 companies. This is your third, correct?
So this is my third. And then so why did we start Deliverect? So when Lights IPO'd, I thought we are going to do a sabbatical, right? And the reality is, after I think 5 weeks in, I had all these restaurants customers calling me. I was like, what are you doing, man? You're way too young. Come to my restaurant. I'll show you a bigger problem to solve. And that was in Spain, a restaurant chain of 80 locations. I mean, the customer started with me when he had 1. And so we were friends. I'm like, what's the problem? And he said, Zhong, what happens? Look, here, you create this point of sale, we do in-store sales, we can manage it. But look, now I have 1 or 2 of these tablets where I get random online sales from. And that was early days, Uber, DoorDash, and so on. And he mentioned but what happens if this today 5 or 10% grows? If, Amazon, what happens in retail is happening in restaurants. What if, in the future, maybe 20-30% of my revenue comes from these marketplaces? What happens if in-store people not going to interact with my waiters? They have a digital device, maybe on their phone. What happens, even crazier if we are in the future world where, you have in your house home automation device where you can order food from, or you have your fridge or any device that's auto replenish whatever you need. How am I going to manage that? I'm a simple restaurant guy. I don't know that. So can you help me and build, actually a nerve center or control center to allow me to still do business, but then don't lose control of it? And so that was actually the premise of the Deliverect. And today, look, it sounds so futuristic. We have drone delivery. We have robots, in your house. You have IoT devices. You have Google Home, Alexa. You have your fridge that can order stuff. We're in talking about AI. We saw that OpenAI a couple of weeks ago launched their app store where, you can just chat and, you can order stuff. So what we talked about, almost 8 years ago, it's reality today. And so what we built is a way to help these restaurants to keep control and enable them to, power that new world of digital sales.
So before we get into the AI and the future, let's go back to the past. You walk into that chain in Spain with 80 units and they say, hey, I've got all these tablets that I'm managing. how am I going to manage my digital presence, my digital operations? At that time, the POS was the tech stack. I mean, maybe you had your POS and you had like a back of house, but it was all powered by the POS. Call it your heartbeat, your brain. How did you imagine this digital presence within the tech stack? How it would change the dynamics within the restaurant?
So one thing I look, it's very common. People always ask me, or even investors, like, why would a point of sale not do that? Um, Back then we tried. Look, because I had this background in point of sale and with Lightspeed, so we went to all these marketplaces, with Uber, DoorDash, Deliveroo, Grubhub, and so on, and they didn't even have APIs. So we co-created because they're like, hey, look, we have all these restaurants. If we give APIs, we can make that work. What we learned very quickly is the world moves very differently online as in store. What do I mean? A point of sale is, in essence, um, not pure a digital software company. It's more a service and hardware company. Why do I mean
Yeah,
with
it's a digital cash register in a lot
That's
of
for
ways.
sure. Because it's more about you cannot update point of sale software on Friday evening at 8 p.m. That's suicide. Like you don't do that because something happens to you, it's suicide. And what happens with these marketplaces, Uber, DoorDash, they do update even their software stack at 9 p.m., 10 p.m. Friday evening. It's not even updated in maybe they have developers in India. They just press the button. They have continuous integrations. So what you see is there's a lot of these channels and each move at different speed. So if you're a point of sale and you need to catch up on that, it means that you need to disrupt often your core business. And beyond that, it's also payment certification. And if you have the App Store back then, you also need to go through the App Store process. You need to have a lot of QA. And so making sure that these two worlds work simultaneously was almost impossible, right? Second, in the digital world, like a point of sale, I always made point of sale is made to make the order operations simple. So the measurement of successful point of sale is number of clicks to take the order. So if someone is standing for you, it's like, you want to take the order in the least amount of push a button to process it. But what does that mean? Online world, like that menu that was super efficient, like click, upsell, modifier, becomes twisted around because online you want to show all the options. You want to, make
I
sure
will
it's beautiful.
explore. It's a process. Yeah.
Yeah. So to merge these two is super hard. And so there's always that conflict. And so that's why, look, the point of sale is the operational center, but then you have this marketing and the digital nerve center. That's what we built because it changes constantly. The menu is always adapting and it's not made for quick operations. It's made for the digital world where, it's customized to you, customized by the moment, customized by the platform, customized by whatever the customer at that moment wants. It's very different than in store.
So you said that the POSs couldn't do this, right? They couldn't connect with the DoorDashes and Uber Eats. Was it a technical hurdle that they couldn't? Like they couldn't get access to the APIs? Or was it really just, my job as a POS isn't necessarily innovation, it is not to screw up, right? And they're built like from a different ethos.
It's not that they cannot on a technical front. It's often it's focus, right? If you're on a point of sale, how much of the focus is doing that? You have so much work where you actually need to make sure the payment works. You need to make sure the taxes works. If you want to expand, in different states and in the U.S. or in different countries, there's a lot of fiscal certification, and you can't just bypass it. So it's quite tough to make that thing on whole work. And on the other end of it, it's a lot about hardware. You need to integrate all these payments terminals, but also printers and KDSs. So the focus of a point of sale is already so heavy on that if you say, hey, I want to do that digital side, where maybe if you even have 20,000 restaurants, how important am I as a point of sale vendor for DoorDash? No, nothing, because like they don't care. They have 1 million restaurants, so they would not put the focus on. So grouping and putting a layer on top of that, where we today work pretty much with every point of sale, that helps, right? Because we can have combined restaurant that matters to these marketplaces where they then pay attention and work with us. And so that's why, look, I've done a point of sale ever once. I'm never going to do a point of sale again. And so we are really that connecting bridge between these two worlds.
Well, it gives you a unique vantage point, especially coming from point of sale, to be able to go work with, every point of sale company. I mean, talk about unique. Man, you see point of sales out there that are like old school servers in the back. What does the landscape of POS look like? And are we starting to phase out of the old school, servers, or is that going to still take another decade?
So today there's globally, I think, around 15,000 point of sales. So people don't know that. They like, oh, Nick, you know the big ones, but like I'm telling you, there's 15,000 of them. And so it's really fragmented. And each time you think like they're going to be less, there's new ones popping up. There's ones popping up for ethnic restaurants, specific for Chinese restaurants. You have, point of sale popping up that are new, especially for stadiums. So these events based, specific, businesses are creating new point of sale. So it's still diverging and not converging. And last but not least, if you think about then these larger chains, they still have sunken cost millions where these older terminals,
Yeah.
it's just too expensive to rip out in one go, right? There's a reason why, it's changing point of sale is called a CIO killer, right? So if the one doing it, you're going to get sacked afterwards because it's so complex.
Yeah, the greatest compliment I gave to a POS company is I don't hear bad things about you because no one, everyone hates on their POS.
Yeah. But maybe one funny story to get them to work with me, although it was COVID, there was some payback because I was like, okay, how do I call these point of sale vendors, these CEOs of these some larger, point of sale companies you all know? What happens if I go them and I was a competitor for 10 years? So most of them let me wait. Well, not most of them. Most of them accepted, but there was a couple that did have payback. They let me wait 45 minutes in the, in the waiting room, literally. And then when I came in, it's like, that was the only payback you're gonna get. Now let's work together. So, as long you work in the industry and you compete, maybe hard, but in the correct way, I think people understand, the benefit of it. So that was really, really good.
All right, talk to me about converging versus diverging, right? We often hear about, Toast and it becoming, it's Toast and Square and, we're all going to be on, a few POSs. But at the same time, talking about what we were talking about before with, the POS is supposed to facilitate, the transaction as quickly and as few clicks as possible. And that is so different in a stadium versus a QSR versus a full service versus an Asian restaurant versus pizza, and I could see it really becoming even more fragmented. I could also see it becoming more, converged to a few. What do you see? What do you think?
I'll give you a different example. If you think about point of sale, it's not a new business, right? Point of sale exists forever. I think one of the oldest public trading company, NCR, was probably National Cash Registration Company, was one of the first point of sale company. And so they scaled. Like they're still big, but they don't have monopoly. And why? Because, if you think about the waves, they were the first, right? They had, the terminals, they had all of it. And then there's still new companies coming up. And so the reality is point of sale is a lot of a service company, right? So it's servicing. Think about if I'm a restaurant at the moment when, something breaks, like the printer breaks, whoever I call that comes to fix my printer, and he says, hey, look, I can do this, but you need to use my point of sale or whatever I'm reselling, you're probably going to take it because that's your local guy. That's the guy that's going to hook you up, right? So because of that, there's a lot of, diverging still of, ethnicity, specification. And so that's ever changing.
Well,
And
especially since hardware got separated from it. Back in the day, you had to be able to manufacture all the hardware. Not everybody can do that. If I can all of a sudden spin up a tablet POS company, that's a lot less capital intensive.
yeah. And there's always like, as larger point of sale build up more stuff. The reality when you build more stuff, the software becomes more complex. So then at the other end, you have people like, hey, we are simple beings. I just run a simple restaurant. I'm a coffee shop. I don't need all maybe table reservations. I don't need floor layouts. Why do I have that? That's clunky. So then you have people saying, hey, I just make something for the coffee shops. And then so each time you have these niches because of the need of the customer, right?
Yeah, I had Rob Wilder on, co-founded Jose Andreas Group, World Central Kitchen, and he tells this story about his first restaurant, and back in the day, you actually he programmed their POS and it was on a floppy disk and they had a backup, and literally, I think one of his managers accidentally erased the backup and wiped the system. And, he talks about coming in that night and it was simple enough that, he reprogrammed their POS and had it up and running for brunch. The POS has gotten so incredibly complex that not only could you not do that, but even the POS company needs help from a company like Deliverect to integrate all this other technology into it.
Yeah. How do you see it? Because clearly with ClearCOGS, you guys need to get a lot of data. Do you work with a lot of point of sales? Do you keep adding new ones, or it's like, oh, that's it?
Well, we had POSs all the time, and it's funny. It's like even the best POSs, there's like 8-10 different ways you can program your menu into it. So even if you think, hey, I've got the same type of restaurant on the same POS, this should be fairly straightforward. Everybody does it differently. And again, you kind of go back to it. Everybody's business is a little bit different. So it kind of makes sense. But I think the thing that you said that I often say, and I think is probably the biggest one, is, all these legacy POSs, these big brands that have servers and hardware and have hundreds of millions of dollars of old POSs that they've standardized on. I was a franchisee. If you came to me and said, hey, go rip out the $40,000 POS you just put in and put in a new one, you better believe I'd be irate. And so I think the most interesting thing is how large brands are actually behind on technology, because the independent restaurant has a cloud-based POS that can just, add a new app that just came out. And now all of a sudden they have that capability.
No, 100%. I think there's a lot of larger chains. I'm not going to name the names, but they run on the estate almost 20 point of sales. It's insane.
Well, if you at least you have 20, you can start moving in one direction. If you have one, you are married to that POS and you have no power in the negotiation. It's like, you want to throw out the $100 million? Go for it. We're not going to give you this new feature.
Exactly. Not easy.
All right. So moving back into the present, you see this opportunity, right? You see that all of the different third-party delivery people, right, have to, and we've got a bunch of different providers. We've got a bunch of different restaurants. Being a middle layer makes total sense. Only one person has to do all of this aggregation. Was it like a light bulb? Did he say it and you're like, this makes sense. This is a business. Or did you have to kind of go grind on it for a while before you decided this was worth it?
It took a while. I think any good idea, like I start doing quite some research. So I just asked a lot of restaurants, and it was a recurring problem where they saw, the shift happening. I think, one of the major thing, if you know its ideas, is you need to look at the market, right? So one thing I learned is, our ideas can be great, and we think always it's hot shit, but at the end of the day, it's not what we do; it's how the market is evolving. And back then, you saw that the delivery market space are taking volume, like growing like at 20-30% year over year. That doesn't sound a lot, but we're talking about the food business, like where, it's mass and vast. It's not like, early age where there's nothing, right? Food is exists for a long time. And so
You're
we
in Europe.
realize at a certain moment, that's going to be big, right?
You're in Europe at this time, correct?
Yeah.
Was the market in Europe similar to that in the United States? Because we're talking like what, 2018? I would think that, we were seeing Uber Eats and DoorDash and all of that in the US. What was Europe like?
It was similar, I think, especially in the UK and Netherlands, and I had a lot of customers in the US, so it was very similar. They're very delivery, even before these platforms existed, was phone and order out nations, right? The bread do their takeaways, right? So you saw that shifting where it's more and more on these platforms. And look, because I was running point of sale, I literally saw the data. Like I was looking at it like quarter over quarter. I was like, man, this is like 10% of the volume. It's like 15% of the volume. What the hell is happening? This is like reaching, 18, 20% of the volume. If you continue that sounds crazy, right? And, the pitch of these restaurants was like, man, Zhong, it's not about these marketplace. I now have social to deal with. All the Gen Z people want to have Instagram. I now need to, promote my restaurant, but also like maybe sell it on Instagram and TikTok and so on. So seeing that the divergence of channels was going to happen. It was, it was eventually going to happen. That's going to be digital. Maybe we don't know what channel, but that really convinced me to do this.
Okay, so that makes sense to me. You see a market that's growing. There are more channels to sell into. The complexity is getting greater. There's a need from the market. You step into, going down this road. Do you remember the moment where you're like, I think this is going to work? Like, this is going to be a thing.
Yeah, look, it's similar. Like one of the things I learned from the first company is like POS, iOS, or Lightspeed restaurant. We coded almost 10 months before we launched the product, and then it took 11 months before we had first customer. And so we learned like, okay, look, it doesn't really matter if you do it. What's the value if you can bring to a customer and they want to pay for it? So in the case of Deliverect, we had no coding. So I pulled up an Excel sheet. I'm like, okay, at the end of the day, you have orders or menus from on the marketplace and you have in restaurant. What if I manually map the PLUs for these restaurants? I'll do it manually. And then each time there's order come in, we have someone that, behind the scene punch the order in the point of sale. And the restaurant will think it's fully automated because they didn't need to deal with it because the volume is not that crazy. And that worked. And the guy was like, if you can do this, I'll pay you. And that's when I realized, look, if the guy has 100 restaurant will pay me $20 for doing that, what if I build a full platform?
That's something that I hear quite frequently from people that have built companies before. And that is not to go start coding, but how do we just manually do this process, 10 times, make sure it works, then decide what we're going to actually write in code. Can you walk me through that? I mean, because I think it's a really powerful concept that not that many people know about or follow.
Look, I think why is our lesson learned, right? So when we launched, our iPad point of sale, we were one of the first. I think we launched in the same month of Square or even earlier. But the reality is we made our point of sale too advanced. Like instead of like just order, pay, we created a floor plan. You can drag and drop chairs, because of restaurant.
Yeah.
You can move it up. It's very nice. So you spend time on that. And we spend time on, creating all these images so that if you wrong press a button, the foods, will pop up, all these fancy stuff. And then we realized like, the essence of it was actually that it was just on an iPad and that you could press coffee, Coke, and pay. And we didn't need all that overhead. If we didn't do that, we would have gone to market 9 months earlier, right? So just the realization of that afterwards was like, man, was it needed? No. And so validating that taught me that like, hey, with Deliverect, we don't need to build all this. We don't need a new UI. If we solve the real problem and they're willing to pay something, then you can iterate on it. Right. And so do stuff that is not scalable, man. People always want to do stuff that's scalable, but what are you scaling? You don't even have a company. You don't even have a product. Just do it simple.
Okay. So is the issue with building that complexity that it takes longer and you might be wrong?
Yeah.
Is it really just the flexibility to make changes, or is it that simpler is in some ways more elegant and user friendly?
It's more that you don't know what if you're right or not. So you only know, I think, if you like, I invest in companies. So if someone tells me they have 100 active using location, I think then you have an MVP. So in my mind, in the restaurant industry, it's like you have 100 restaurants and they use your software on a daily level or at least a weekly level, then you have something that works. So get there ASAP. So, I don't care you have a product UI, but get them to use it or it's essential for 100. Once you're there, you can replicate it and then maybe make it simpler by having a user interface or a software. But before you reach that point, do you really know that it's going to be, something valuable? You have no clue, right?
Interesting. Okay. That makes total sense. Okay. So going back to it, do you remember that moment where you're like, this is going to work? Because I get that you do it manually 10 times, but there's a big difference between, I think there's something here and we've struck a nerve, right?
we struck a nerve once. Like I very quickly, I think in the first couple months, I added 300-400 restaurants. Look, I know these restaurants, so that may be cheating
You
because
say the first couple months you
yeah.
added a
So
couple hundred?
because we started very quick. I think within 3 months, I had 300 restaurants using it because I don't have software. So I just called the people I knew. I'm like, if I do this, are you ready to pay me? It was very cheap. I was like, if you're ready to pay me $10 a month, like for your locations, uh, I'll make sure this problem goes away. And look, they were fine. And then I like, what about 20? They were like, okay. What about 29? They were like, okay. So very quickly after, you validate it. And that was in a lot of smaller restaurants, some chains. And that was not in one country, was in almost a dozen countries where I had people using it. I could, behind the scene, I had just hired some interns to repunch the items.
Yeah, I was going to say, Zhong, you wake up 3 months later, you've got a dozen different countries, right? I imagine you've got 50 different POSs that you need to service, or
Back then, I
20.
was only doing it for Lightspeed. So that was the
Okay.
thing I learned.
Okay. I was going to say, where is this army of interns that's plugging the numbers in?
So very quickly, we coded the software and
Yeah.
to automate it. But like, I think that was the moment. Like once you tipped 100 locations and they were ready to pay you 10, it doesn't mean a lot, but someone paying you 10, $20 a month, like it's crucial, right? And so that's the moment we said, okay, look, we need to build this out and scale it.
By the way, so you started out doing coding, correct?
Yeah. So I still code so the first iPod point of sale we coded, Deliverect, we coded ourselves. So we don't need, in these days, it's even easier. We can vibe code it. I don't even need to write code anymore, but it's good
I was going to say, do you still write code at all?
So my developers had banned me from the code base, but I like to play with it. So at least they can't talk me under the table. But so they're sometimes surprised, like, how does the guy know about what we're doing?
Yeah. And I imagine today you're like just throwing it into like Cursor or Windsurfer or something like that, and getting sped up on what they're doing, and then all of a sudden you can look really smart.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? You can fast prototype.
All right, so I'm curious, what channels are growing the fastest today? Is it, ordering through the metaverse and video games? Is it social media that's growing the fastest where, restaurants are, getting orders in? What are the growing things that people might not be aware of?
Well, to be frank, I think today still the fastest growing channels are these marketplaces, right? Because they have so many users or customers at the end of the day, and they put so many marketing dollars in. I think there's more and more a shift of brands going first party. They want to own their customers, but to do that, they really need to own the full delivery experience, right? I think the age where you do curbside pickup or takeout, that doesn't have volume. Look, people want to do that, but like it's like sub 5% volume, right? So if you really want to drive volume, you need to attach delivery on it. What we do see is, in the case of loyalty is, Instagram and so on, it has an impact, but then more for, generating these loyal customers coming back and getting their attention. But sadly to say, the higher volume is still in marketplaces. Although I think, with the changing world, that could change quite rapidly. Look, especially in the age of AI, where you had OpenAI launching their app store, and then other LLMs, pretty much everyone in the agentic world thinking about agentic commerce. It's going to be built in, I think, at a certain moment, wherever you want to, that you can order. Can be your fridge, can be your, home automation device. The promise of telling your voice automation device, hey, give me a burger. Like, my favorite, just get it, and ship it. That's eventually will materialize. And I think that's going to have a big impact.
And before we get into that, I wanted to talk about third-party delivery. I've got mixed feelings on it. I ran Jimmy John's. I had Jimmy John's franchises, and we did first-party delivery. For those restaurants who haven't actually done first-party delivery, it's a nightmare to run, staff, manage. Then on the flip side, I look at the fees that, are taken by a DoorDash and Uber Eats, and you're seeing, kind of a backlash to that. What's the current state of that relationship between third-party delivery and restaurants, and where do you think it's going?
I think for a restaurant is you need to be omni-channel, right? So one does not rule out the other, right? Then what's all the benefits for third party is okay, you have a larger user base. There's a lot of marketing happening. It's easy for you, right? You don't need to do anything. As a restaurant, it just works. Of course, the counts are commissions. You have competition with a lot of restaurants, and you don't have as much control of the user experience, right? But it's still there's a lot of pros. On the direct side, I think if you want to do the first party side, yes, you control the experience, you keep more profits, you have more control on cost, but man, it takes a lot of work to make the thing work, right? And there's a lot of money in building the tech and building managing riders, and your marketing cost is immense more higher than when it goes to third party. And so how I look at it is, imagine you have a normal restaurant before you had delivery. You also put your restaurant in the place where you had most foot traffic, because foot traffic translates into sales. So the reality on digital is the same. So you want to be at every place possible where potentially a customer passes by. So it could be a third-party marketplace, can be social, can be, maybe they want to do catering, maybe they want to do voice, maybe they want to do with your website. So wherever your customer can pass by, just be present and collect the sale. Because if you are not there, they're still going to order, but then not with you.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense. And you really went on the experiential side, which is almost the emotional part of it. I'm kind of curious about the economic side. If you are an economist sitting here saying, what is the market equilibrium for, cost of third party and what share they should be taking from the restaurant? Where are we today? Where do you think it ultimately settles?
Well, that's good question. I think at the moment we are getting into a healthy balance, right? Up to now, or up to a couple, maybe quarters ago, I think these marketplaces were still heavily funding the cost acquisition and delivery, right? So the price have gone up, but then now at least they are making a profit. Maybe not huge profit, they're making a profit. I think that's when you see an equilibrium where if everyone can make a profit, I think it stabilizes. And once you have that, everyone's going to work on, hey, how do we make the whole operation more efficient so that we can lower the cost, right? Because, especially in the venture capital world, in the marketplace, they were heavily investing to get market share. But now you see every third-party marketplace focusing on bottom line for them, focusing on error rate, focusing on reducing refunds because that costs them money and the restaurant money. So if you remove all of that, then you can actually lower the commission quite a lot.
All right, I want to switch gears. So, talking about the future of ordering, agentic AI is a subject that everybody wants to talk about, right? How do I have agents? How do I tell my agent to order me lunch, get it from the best place, and have it delivered to this address? MCP is something that comes up as the language that these agentic agents are going to use to communicate. Since you are the aggregator, the communication layer in the digital world, walk me through MCP, what it is, how you view it, and eventually I'd love to talk about how you see it, actually coming into, a Deliverect or being used practically.
No, 100%. Look, I'm a believer that, AI is not a fad. There's a lot of investments, maybe temporary is overhyped, but this will remain and it will be game changing for us, right? For everyone. I think that's something I deeply believe in. To work with these systems, these LLMs, OpenAI and so on, you need to find a way to talk to each other, right? So even if you think about agentic, for agentic, it means it's basically maybe even a human, like knowledge that can understand and do stuff, but then that human still need to talk to a different human at the other side, right? And basically that's what NCP is, right? So first of all, I think today connectivity is built through APIs. Maybe you heard APIs, application programming language interface. So like I would call what we do today a lot of orders getting from one place to other through API. It's like the plumbing, right? If you say, hey, I want to do one specific thing, it gets done through that API as a plumbing, right? So that's the base layer. What's NCP? It's called Model Context Protocol, is actually a smart layer on top of that plumbing, right? So it's a AI model that actually knows how to use the plumbing and use the data that's coming out of the plumbing. So what do I mean with that? If you think about plumbing as like, hey, I want to ask a point of sale, give me the product. The point of sale will just give you the product, right? So an NCP will be a layer on top of that. They will get the product, but then maybe they also get the sales out of the point of sale. They will get then through the plumbing of the delivery marketplace, the sales on that side. And then it can have a brain to connect everything and tell you, hey, look, your sale of this product was the best, because they have the brain that collects all the data, really. And so that's really the translator layer between the plumbing and other NCP or other agent. And so the reality is, once you have these NCP or agent build up on your software, they can all start talking to each other. So it means that in a useful case, as what OpenAI is doing, you can type, hey, give me a salad under $20 that can be delivered within 30 minutes.
All
Well,
right. Well, real quick, just so we talk about them talking to each other.
Yeah.
APIs were a way for computers to talk to each other. It seems ironic that large language models, which literally just are translating information, wouldn't naturally be able to just talk to each other. I mean, that's literally what they do. Why the need for the intermediary?
So the thing is, when you have information pulled out through API, is really one-sided, right? You don't have the full context, right? If you ask a point of sale, hey, give me the product, it's just the product. But if you ask a point of sale, hey, what's the product that is quickest made, they have context, right? The point of sale NCP, for example, can look at historical data of all sales and see what product was cooked quicker, what came out quicker, and that they have in stock, and so on. So it's almost a brain that can give you that answer. In the other case, it would be OpenAI pulling all the data out and then reason there, right? And that's really difficult, because that means that they need to first get all the integrations done on the API layer, one by one, get the data out, and then analyze it. So it's easier to have an NCP built in your software that can answer the question that the other party wants, instead of them trying to understand everything.
All right. So real quickly, make sure that I'm, comprehending this correctly. Old systems, APIs, databases, SQL queries, these are all very structured. There's documentation. I put in the following, line or call, and I get the, corresponding data back, right? There's not a lot of flexibility there. You're moving to a world of large language models that are unstructured, right? So the issue is having a bunch of unstructured things talking to each other. I imagine that's why we get a lot of the, what do they call them? Hallucinations, right? Too much unstructured talk to each other. But my question on MCP is this, what large language models are really good at is, if I say, here's my API documentation, what is the call to get royalty sales? You know what I mean? It would be able to fill that call out. So I guess what I don't understand is, why wouldn't I just give one side or the other the information? Like, what's with the MCP in the middle, right?
It's the interpretation, right? So imagine we're talking to each other. We all have information, right, in our brains. You have information about your business, your history. I have information what I've done. But then if you don't have the brain, I'll give you a raw dump of, all my memories. You still can't, understand the experience of connecting all the dots, understanding, the history of things, understanding, the context that I live through these memories, right? So for you to
give me an example where I would need that context, where, let's say I wanted to know what was my best performing item, right? Why would I need context instead of just, what was the top selling? You know what I mean? Like,
but what's your best performing item? So if you ask me, hey, what's your best performing item? In my system could be like the user or the restaurant owner says, hey, for me, best performing item is actually not per se the sales. The best performing item is one that I have the highest gross profit margin because I want to have I want to have profit, right? So the context in that system is set up of like, hey, drive not only top line sales, drive, profit, right? That's the context I have, right? So I would then look at what's possible. And then second, I would then know also, hey, you want a best performing item, I can tell you probably the item that you can sell at mass vs maybe, items that I don't have in stock. So I have specific context that is relevant for me that I can give you and then you can use it. In other case, you are analyzing using my data, but how do you know what do you mean with that? Like,
all right, so this makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Right? You best performing items, perfect. I want to know my best performing item. Let's say I'm asking an agent that is on my POS system, right?
Yeah.
There's context there of, do I mean the most profitable item, the one that sold the most of, the highest revenue? Is MCP basically on my side saying, hey, my person wants to know the best performing item. And when they say best performing item, they mean the following thing, right? And then it goes over. So does it live on my side of it, or is it
lives on your
where does it
side.
live?
Yeah, it lives on your side of it. It's similar if you use ChatGPT now, right? You have probably added so much context about yourself that when you now even mistype stuff, even things that doesn't make sense, they will still come up the reasoning that you wanted because they have the context, right? So similar to, in a point of sale, in delivery, look, we have the context. We know what people really mean with that. So, you have a different agent asking something simplistically, we can give you the right answer.
Okay, so you're going to do a full paradigm shift for me, because I often hear of MCP as being like the API for large language models. What you almost described to me is my digital persona. Like when I get on ChatGPT and say, what do you know about me? How do I like things written? How do I like things answered? Right? It's almost that mapping they have for, how do I interact with the world? So it's almost not affecting, it's not like the API call structure. It's like the descriptions that describe how to use each of the APIs for me. Is that fair?
That's fair. It's like, understanding how to interpret the data because we have the context, but as well, protecting the data, right? For example, there's stuff like, you don't want to, maybe with API, you get a data dump and even it includes customer info and so on. So
I don't want to give the POS system my life story and why I like to know about the highest grossing item and not the highest revenue. It just needs to know the fact that I'm looking for the highest revenue. And so I don't have to give it my full brain. I can just give it the little context it needs.
Yeah, but that's why, look, the first time you will type it in, like, hey, for me, best performing is on the profit. So show me on that in the future. So the context will know. So if a different, system, maybe your ClearCOGS system is asking the point of sale in this case, like, hey, give me the best performing item, you're going to automatically getting the items that your customer, this restaurant user, meant as best performing. And yes, there will be a context. By the way, ClearCOGS, we handed you this data, but remember that for this restaurant, he cares about profits. If you want to look at pure sales, we can do that as well. But so you have the whole context so that the information then you're presenting to the end user, the restaurant, it's already matching his right interpretation and context.
Okay, so let's talk about your business. Let's talk about AI and how it affects things. I actually look at, the fragmentation of the restaurant tech stack. It's one of the biggest barriers in technology, right? It's hard to work across all these systems. One of the things AI is really good at is actually doing the grunt work of, matching POS items to menu items. Here's how the POS is mapped and doing it automatically. A lot of, basically what you guys were doing on Excel spreadsheets to start out. Is that almost going to be commoditized because AI, you could vibe code that today? Or is that not something that's easily replicated. And I ask that to say, like, how is AI going to affect that part of the business? And then how is it going to change, in this world of agentic AI and communicating?
I think building a pure integration itself, it's not that hard. Like we these days, we already use a lot of AI to generate these codes, right? So that can be quicker. The reality is to do this at mass, it's not about just getting the APIs because you could also scale with people, right? There's no difference. It's having the partnership agreement, have the relationship, having the in-person side, the contracting done so that you can actually share data because it's sensitive. So a lot of that security. I think what makes us extra relevant is it's not actually today about getting the order from one to B. We do that extremely well. But actually, over 70 desert restaurants use us as their platform to manage their menus, manage the sales. So, we have all the menus of all these restaurants and all the variances. So even if you can generate the APIs, you still need to get all these menus set up the way that the human wants. And even with AI, someone is still giving the command of like, hey, change the pricing this and that. So the source of truth of these menus live with us. And that's something that is very hard to replicate and very hard to remove. Yes, you can make a integration, but that's not the hard bit. Although it's very hard to make 1,000 agreements with point of sale vendors because they're not that always that easy to give you that access, right? So that's the hard bit and not the coding side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to your execution side of things, it's not necessarily the idea; it's the execution. It's all the contracts.
But the AI side does help. Like for example, we have today AI resolve, right? So if something happens, imagine on your marketplace you have an order that is not in point of sale. The AI will look, hey, is there a matching item? Maybe they change names, and if they have high probability, they will still send it through. So that helps, right? That's something that AI can solve the errors that you had before, that was completely failing, right?
All right, so I'm going to take a step in a little bit of a different direction, just because, and we're going to come back because I do want to get back to MCP and like how you look at that from an aggregation standpoint. But you brought a couple things, and that is security, vibe coding. I sit here in a world where I think it was yesterday we filmed this, in advance. AWS went down, and it's a reminder of the whole world can just get, shut down pretty darn quickly, how much we rely on it. I imagine that in a world where you're vibe coding more and more, I'm not saying you, but companies are more and more, like the chances of, a wrong comma in the wrong place, bad software that gets out of date, you use the wrong script and, things get shut down. Do you sit here and look at AI programming and say, man, we need to spend a whole lot of time making sure it's right? Or do you sit there and say, actually, it tends to get things right a lot better than the humans? Driverless cars getting a heck of a lot less accidents, even though they seem scarier.
I would say it's different. I think it's very useful for today. Eventually, it will take over everything. But today, it's very useful for the facade. What do I mean by that? If you build a house, the foundation need to be strong, right? And then, the interior design, you can change it maybe every 3 months. Like if you want to paint it today yellow, tomorrow, white, whatever, with AI vibe coding, it's press a button and it changes. But the foundation of it, I think that you need to make sure it's solid because if you don't know how the wiring works, and that's often the problem when you want to scale it, then it becomes an issue.
You want to come up with a new dashboard or a UI,
That's fine.
no
You can make a
visual,
dashboard
great.
you want. Yeah.
But like the core system needs to, be really dependable. That, as you said, source of truth.
Yeah.
As it gets better, does letting the AI into the core system, which does give you a lot more flexibility to make changes, but it also, I don't want to say, puts into question the sole source of truth. How far do you think AI is going to go into that core system?
It's a bit dangerous as well. I think so. That's where security and guardrailing you want to happen, right? Especially like in NCP. Imagine different NCP asking sensitive info, and if you don't guardrail it, and the NCP actually has access to raw data, and just feed it back, suddenly you have a data breach, right? It can be like, hey, I want the credit card information of your customers, and if you don't have it really tied down, these stuff happens. So, having these security and guardrails and fallbacks is going to be more and more key. So the technology can do it all, but like, before coding, you also need to lock down your database, right? So that's where a lot of things are happening these days, where, to limit actually the scope of what these NCPs or these AI can do. It's a bit scary because it can bypass everything, right? So, yeah.
So like you're in a world where we're talking about MCP and, more and more agentic. You had OpenAI launched their app store last week. I imagine it's on your mind. How are we going to start taking orders from agents?
Yeah.
Where are we today? How do you think about it in the future? What's that world look like?
No, I think for us, it's a similar one. We start with marketplace. We want to help these restaurants to keep control. So our goal is to integrate with all these LLMs, all these agentic worlds, and we will help restaurants so that they can be independent on these platforms, right? Because one side there's a difference. Like if you're OpenAI, you ask, give me a salad, it will probably search for Uber Eats, DoorDash, and then you want them to also search the physical restaurants, the independent, the direct channel. And then it will give an offering to the end user. And, there's differentiation because indeed, maybe if you go direct, because of, lesser commissions, it's cheaper or there's special promos, and then you get picked. But at the end of the day, it's similar like now, end customer has choice, right? Your choice of going to a marketplace or going to your website. So we need to make sure that this is available for these restaurants. And so that's why we're building these connectivities, right? And at the end of the day, I think because the AI doesn't have UX UI biases, it will look at more, objective, reasoning. So what they will look at is real pricing and not because of promos, maybe, because I'm already on the website. I already took time to scroll through it. They will look at final pricing. Maybe they will look at, hey, what's really the delivery time? So they will take into account more of these elements to provide the best service for the end customer. And so this could be a massive changing factor for, restaurant that suddenly, because they can have a better pricing, better service, get picked earlier or quicker than, these marketplaces. So who knows?
Yeah, but in some ways, when you went out to go build a digital POS or order aggregation, that playbook had been written in other industries prior, right? So you kind of knew how to build and where to go in some ways. No one really knows how to go build this today. It almost feels like we're all kind of guessing which direction and how to go about building it. So when you say you guys are preparing and starting to build, what are you building and how? Like how are you figuring it out in real time?
So one of the things, what we build is we build an NCP server on top of our AI, right? So on top of our pipes or APIs, where we limit it was only on the ordering side. So we will not allow other NCPs to pull data out. So for example, they can have very limited menu that is public. We would show it and we would query it, and then they could place the order. So for example, allowing that already allows you to do different workflows with these AI agents, right? And look, for the rest, do I know exactly where the world goes? No. I know something is going to happen, and the goal and the job of us is to keep on experimenting and figuring out what it is, and eventually something will materialize that will change the world.
Well, in some ways, this is where execution really matters because fundamentally we know how people order. That's not changing. So it's really just working out the technical aspects of how do we do it in a new method.
How do you guys do it? Because especially with ClearCOGS, I think you can do a lot of forward predictions. Do you use NCPs to get the data out? How do you guys make that happen? I'm very
You know,
curious about that.
the ugly hard truth is all the AI stuff, large language models, is really sexy. In our world, it's still shit in, shit out. We spend a ton of time just doing data cleansing and layering in data sets. And, the biggest benefit to us is our guys, our hardcore like data scientists, they don't really think in fonts or colors or any of that. It's just, time series forecasting, dialing in accuracy. So, man, you better believe as, vibe coding has come out and, these large language models, which are really good translation layers. It's like, oh, thank God, that they're here. They can make things pretty. They can make the communication better, and we can just focus on, how do you get the best number? So no, that we're not playing around with MCP or any of that right now. It's still focused on the fundamentals.
Hey, look, at the end of the day, whatever happens, plumbing need to be done. And in the world of AI, if you're a plumber, you're never gonna be out of a job.
But you brought up an interesting fact or a thought there, and that is, can you use MCP to facilitate structured problems that you already deal with, where it should answer the same way as you would every time, as almost like a shadow pipeline or whatever it is, so that I can kind of like compare where did it fail. Like that would be an interesting. I think that would be an interesting way to validate that the MCP is working correctly.
Yeah, I think you can have NCPs that's going to check each other's work, right? It's like in coding. A developer, like, AI that generates code, and you have a QA agent that reasons differently that go and check. So that's something like every human job you have, you can, you still need even, AI agents, you need someone else to check it. So that's a reality.
You could go set up 50 different personas and then have a structured order come in, off a DoorDash and literally turn it into, a large language model written, this is the person ordering, and then feed it through your MCP and see how it actually, works. Did they get the order correct? It would be an interesting way to test its scale without actually like turning it loose. Sorry, that was a random thought process I was having.
Yeah, and look, I think what's interesting is once you have codified like your knowledge, for example, in there, then you can like almost have an agent say like, hey, look, we want a Matt, agent that has all these experiences. Tell me his perspective looking at my business. And because you have put all your contacts in there, you're basically getting all your experience and looking at the different data, and you can interpret. That's the difference. Like if you're running a business or you're not running a business, the data will be exactly the same, but how you interpret and make decisions is because of your context, is because of your, experience. And this is what NCP can do. That's the bring above the data.
All right. You're the only person I've ever talked to that's actually had any experience with drone delivery. You mentioned it earlier in this. What's drone delivery like? Who's using it? I mean, what's your experience? Because it's such an interesting, fascinating topic.
Oh, I mean, that's happening at a rapid pace in the US, right? I think, look, there's a lot of companies doing it, Flytrax, Win, but like, I think what's happening is the FAA is allowing, the expansion of it. And, these guys have vast plans to cover a large of regions, right? And the reason why they want to do that, I mean, it's very simple, the cost model, right? If you think about food delivery, majority of that is still going to the rider that is paid per hour that need to get tips. So if you can remove that and you have a one-time OPEX that you can then deliver for a long time, it lowers the cost or increases the profit. Think about even like these days with Tesla that has autonomous driving. I think instead of an Uber that's like $20, it costs $4. Right. So how do you compete with that at a larger scale? So that's where the future is going, right?
Well, I mean, it makes sense. We're going to take a 2,000 some pound vehicle and we're going to put the energy into it to make it drive. And then we're going to put a human in it that's going to spend their time driving a order to your house. Like it seems like from just energy perspective, time perspective, incredibly inefficient. But is it that, knowing that it's inefficient and a little drone just dropping it off seems way more energy efficient? How far off are we from it? I've never gotten a drone delivery. When am I getting my first drone deliveries on?
I don't think you're that far off. I think there's a lot of areas where it's being experimented. I think it's everything in technology. It has a curve, it takes slower, but then suddenly it lifts up. And then, I don't think, I think within this, and I would not even say 5 years, within this and 2-3 years, it's going to be autonomous. We are not that far off. The technology is there. It's a lot of regulations that is happening to allow it. Then pure tech. The tech is available, right? So I think within 2-3 years, autonomous cars driving your food to your house. It's already happening in major cities where you can drive, instead of an Uber, you get a, autonomous vehicle. Drone delivery of food, it's going to be even easier because you don't sit in traffic. It's going to arrive hot and quicker. So yeah.
It feels like the world as we innovate, gets more and more complex. And then once it gets too complex, somebody comes along and just simplifies the entire thing and puts it all together. And then it, becomes more and more complex again. I sit here and think of me, and this is not far off world, asking ChatGPT to order me a sandwich. It is going to contact an Uber Eats to order the sandwich, which is going to go through a Deliverect, which is going to get fed into a POS, which is going to go as an order, which is then going to get fulfilled by a drone delivery company that is going to fly it out here and take a photo. That's an incredibly complex ecosystem to get my sandwich delivered. Is it going to get even more complex than that? Or are we closer to somebody coming in and saying, we're going to do it all as one process?
I would say it's different. You would see it's from the new platform. If you're a new player, it's not that complex because all the legwork is done. So similar like you, we build software companies. In the old ages, we need to go and buy a computer, put it together, put it in a cupboard, put the electricity on, do the wiring, and then hope, do DMS to hope that, anyone in the world can, through the shitty internet, use our software. These days, okay, maybe AWS went down, but still, you have AWS, Google, you press a button, and your software is online. And so that complexity is still there, but abstracted. So we are building on top of giants that precede us. And so for that to work, yes, a couple of decades ago, people laid pipes and cables around the world so that you could have internet, right? So thinking about it, it still exists, the old world. It's complex, but it's infrastructure. And once that infrastructure is there, you can have new people that have innovative ideas that, with very simple ways, build game-changing stuff. And that's what you and me are building today to empowering the future.
Yeah, that makes sense. If I wanted to do drone delivery, I'd say, well, they want to order on an app. I have to get everyone to use the same ordering platform. I don't want to recreate DoorDash or Uber Eats. I certainly don't want to have to go integrate into all the POS companies to do my drone delivery. There's a lot of steps I don't want to recreate. But the flip
That's why
side
you
of
use
it is,
us. Why would you recreate and do the hard work? I mean, it's not.
why would you? But the flip side of that is, you going back to how do I do the absolute simplest thing, to test it, because complexity is the enemy of flexibility. It's almost like you get a lot of specialization right now and you make room for these companies to operate, but also it does make the system less flexible, doesn't it? Or maybe it makes it more competitive and dynamic.
It allows you to scale quicker, right? Because you don't need to waste your time doing, a lot of these basic stuff. If you're a startup today, with two guys, you vibe code, you can start running. Before, look, you need to have servers, you need to have, study maybe 5-6 years in computer software engineering. So all of this enables your creativity and to accelerate. If you have an idea, you can go. It's like the MVP story. Instead of, have so much sunken cost to test something else, you just can go, run, validate, and if it works, you can scale. And maybe after, there's part that you want to get more custom and better, you could, but you don't need to. It's really easy to start.
All right, last question. We'll get you out of here. The economics of restaurants aren't great. It's a low profit margin industry, high turnover, a lot of stress. Do you see technology pushing to a world where, those economics look better? What gives you hope about this industry, improving its place in the world?
So look, two things, not to sell our product, but two things we're doing is there's two sides we're really working on. Maybe on the top line level, one of the things is we're doing a lot with menu agents, right? So we're running a lot of restaurant chains where these days the menu that you see on these digital channels actually get dynamic changed, not every day, not even every shift, but every 10 minutes, like even quicker.
Wow.
So, for example, we run a coffee chain, right? So what happens if it's really hot out there? The cold beverage is just changed on top. As well, once you select some items, the upsell, I mean, you always have these upsell symbols popping up, right? It's tailored to warm weather. If we know that around 5 to 6 p.m. or in the morning, people are really doing a lot of sports, it's the healthy option. And why is that? Because you know these habits and you know these events. Because if you do that, we almost can increase the top line sales by 15 to 20% without raising a dime, without raising prices. Just because people at that time say, hey, it's logical, it makes sense. Yeah, I want it, right? So that's one of the things you can do with technology to increase the top line. Another thing we're doing is, bottom line is, I talked about refunds and, these cases where the restaurant loses money. If you order something on Uber Eats or DoorDash and you get it home and something's wrong, you want a refund because they put the wrong item in the bag. The marketplace and the restaurant loses money, and you are frustrated because your food is delayed. Well, we created a product called Resolve, where you have cameras that automatically detect what goes in the bag. Right. So, for example, if you're a packing station and you're packing a burger and you're putting the wrong burger in live, it will tell you, hey, Matt, it's the wrong burger. You need to put a different burger in. And it's not disruptive if you have not done anything wrong. But if you're doing something wrong and you forgot something, it will tell you right then. And why is that?
Also, you're a really good arbiter of truth there, because the customer doesn't believe the restaurant and the restaurant doesn't believe the customer. So it's nice having a third party in the loop.
I mean, the reality is 5 to 8% of a delivery order is there's something wrong, right? And so even restaurants that are good have 5% where they lose, of all their orders that need to refund. And did you know that almost 60% of those cases on marketplace is fraud? Right?
No, I didn't. That's insane.
So 60% we benchmarked it is fraud. So someone's saying, hey, this is wrong burger, or like they took a picture, and these days they use AI to take the burger picture and then ask AI to make the
gosh, of course they do. Add a hair to it.
So that you refund the burger because the burger is undercooked. So you refund the money and they get a new burger. But then they actually use AI to use the wrong picture. Like all this stuff happening. And so you need now almost 100% proof to prove that to the marketplace. Hey, the item was ready, as well to the customer. Like, hey, actually we have a video showing that burger goes to the bag. So you can't say it was not there. Maybe someone ate it in the middle, but if the packaging was never opened, it's very hard to dispute that. So
I would think that they would be more like Amazon or where they're just like, hey, keep it, you're all good, don't worry about it, and we've noted it in your history. And every now and then they're going to ask for it back just to make sure. Almost like the gambling sites where if you just went to any of these and said, hey, I'm going to bet $1 million on this next pitch, they'd be like, heck no. We've seen your patterns of gambling. We're not going to accept that bet. I would think, it'd be, you'd be able to manage it through the data.
But that's when you have proof that they're fraud, because else it's my word as a customer against the word of the restaurants, and then you have a rider and a marketplace in between.
You had a third one and I cut you off. What was the third innovation?
No, I think these was, the menu, the Resolve, and then look, everything related AI with NCP, right? I think that's what we're doing with agents. I think NCP goes further than just ordering. Like one of other example we're doing with NCP is, for example, when it's busy, the agent can automatically, you can create a brain script around it. So for example, you can say, hey, look, it's super busy in my restaurant, and how do you know when it's busy? Well, the agent will pull point of sale data out, delivery data out, and then as it's over a certain peak, then make sure I have a fast menu. So what it does is, hey, when it's suddenly busy, it will create a fast menu. So items that are easier to make, put it on all your online channels so that you're not losing sales, but it's just easier. And then you can say, hey, and also notify my staff, let them know that something is changing. So like a lot of automation that before was like, fixing rules can be done where almost a brain where it's like, hey, if busy, make sure it's optimized profit. Oh, if it's busy, go and get me more stuff. Like, so it becomes way more intelligent than saying, hey, if busy, shut down my channels. Or if busy, don't sell online, right? That's what happens today.
I always look at everything from the franchised perspective because I'm an ex-franchisee. I wonder if MCP will be tailored to the individual restaurateur, franchisee, the manager, or at the corporate level, so that it's giving the information that the corporation wants you to see. It'll be interesting.
With all of them and above, because you will have multiple agents. You will not have one.
Yeah, well, yes. Well, wait till the franchisors get involved. They'll find a way to make sure your agent's not getting anywhere. Well, Zhong, I got to say, first off, thank you for coming on. This was, I think you might have changed my view of MCP. I think I understand it now, and I think I see some value there.
Well, looking forward to see what you guys do in ClearCOGS.
Anybody wants to find you, best way to get in touch if they're looking to bring in Deliverect, where's the best place to reach you?
Well, you can find a lot of info on our website, deliverect.com. But if you want to reach me personally, go on LinkedIn, enter Zhong Xu, and send me a message. I'm very easy reachable.
Hey, he's offering it up, folks. Everybody go out and start sending messages to Zhong. He's oddly available on LinkedIn. Well, Zhong, I appreciate you coming on. This was fantastic. And, I appreciate what you're doing for the industry.
Thank you, Matt. Likewise.